Good evening, everyone. This is Kristen Ferguson, Chair of the Planning Board, calling this virtual public meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. on March 9th, 2021. Let's take roll. Mr. Flint.
Here.
Mr. Bosdet.
Here.
There he is. Mr. Saya.
Here.
Ms. Orvidal.
Here.
Ms. McEnany.
Here.
And Ms. Miller.
Here.
All right, well, welcome everyone. Tonight we are ironing out the hopefully last of our draft bylaws. We have one more meeting on the 23rd before the warrant closes. Elizabeth, thank you very much for sending our bylaws as what we have over to Town Council. In particular, I think they're going to pay close attention to the earth removal bylaw. So that is going to be a big help. So we will hear back from them hopefully at the meeting on the 23rd.
So I actually did get an email from them late this afternoon.
Great,
so,
okay.
What I can do is, if you want to start with that one, I can bring up their comments and then their questions. And it may be good just to go through that and maybe not have a lengthy discussion about it tonight, give everybody time to think about this.
Okay.
And then come back, at the next meeting, but I leave that up to the board to decide. So if you.
Okay, so on the table, that sounds good to me. On the table, we've got earth removal, which does have, a number of changes in it. We're gonna hear Town Council's feedback and let's make sure we finalize that on the 23rd. The draft bylaws for the floodplain and tree bylaw are pretty straightforward. We're going to want to take a look at the explanations for those and make sure those are as clear as possible and see if we have any additions there. We're going to take one more look at the two-family because there's a couple things going on with that. And then more recently, we've been asked to look at seasonal seating, I think there's two parts of the seasonal outdoor seating, right, Elizabeth? The first part that was brought to us and then, or is it just all one? I thought one was like parking relief and then the other one is?
No, it's all just to allow seasonal outdoor seating without requiring additional parking.
Okay, all right. Good, okay. So those are kind of the main things on our docket. And again, let's have as much discussion and come to consensus on what we can tonight, knowing that the next meeting is our last one before the warrant closes.
And then there's also, the last one would be the request from Kevin Hurley, which I have an update on that one as well.
And that, yeah, so that would be related to the two-family. All right, so anybody from the board have anything to add before we get started on the articles?
No.
All right, so let's start with earth removal. I'm curious to know how our changes were received and if it looks like it's legally attainable, if we've got defensible language that we can objectively make a decision on. So thanks, Haley, for your work on this, and there is still time to kind of weigh in on this.
So this is the document Town Council sent over with their track changes. And can everybody see this okay?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you. So really it's, minor as far as the beginning. And then I think this is just simplifying, instead of not create, prevent and traffic. And so I think these are, I would say what are, minor changes, just clarifying, words. Anybody have any question on at least those first? No, okay. So right now I can only see Alan, Kate, and Haley. So I'm gonna, if any of those three say no, if somebody else has a question, please make sure you speak up. And then there isn't any additional changes because these are just including the word fill or filling in the bylaw until we get down to this section where I think this is where these items are already included and they, just putting them in this bulleted, format so that they're easier to read. However, town council's comment is, the first comment is, this was always there and this is in fact more detailed, but what does it mean? And he's talking about item A, attractive land use utilization, the definition of which should be informed by the town's long range plan, if any. So I think that's, the question from council is that, what does this mean? And is there something more specific that we can put in here as measurable points instead of, something which should be informed by the town's long-term plan. And then the second question is, if there's a hearing, the public can provide input on any of this, but there's a risk in making the determination reliant on public input. So that's where they struck out and public input, if any. So what the board needs to understand for, under a zoning bylaw that may require a public hearing, public input is part of the hearing process for either the planning board or the Board of Appeals. And that input is taken into as part of the board's deliberation, but it should not be included as part of a zoning bylaw. Public input is something that the board weighs. You're always going to have, for, against, and different sides, and it's something that the board should take into consideration and weigh against what the purpose intent is of the zoning bylaw. So I think that would be the reason that he's proposing that this be struck. Any questions or?
I would just say, I get it's maybe the lack of clear meaning in point A, and maybe something along the lines of, the plan should minimize changes in existing contours to enhance land utilization that is in accordance with the goals expressed in the town's long-range plan. Because there are expressed goals, at least in this last one, right?
Yeah, so maybe between now and the next meeting, we could actually just pull out specific, so you're pulling out specific goals and putting them in a zoning bylaw adds another layer of complexity, because
and they can come out of date every 10 years, potentially.
Yeah, potentially. So so what was, Burton, can you say that? And I'm just going to type it in here and I will.
Yeah, just as a suggestion for people to consider. I would take out the word attractive. I would say a land utilization that is in accord with the goals expressed in the town's long range plan. That is in accord.
Yeah, I mean, I thought this one was interesting in that, to her point, like it was attractive land utilization. And then of course the question is like, well, who gets to define that? And without adding more specificity in here some way, which was kind of why I was thinking about this, is like, well, is it like the zoning board at the given time gets to decide like what is attractive land, or like, yeah, how do you actually define that? But interestingly enough, like attractive land, like it seems to be used in every single, earth removal bylaw in the greater Boston area. So it's not like this is a unique problem to us, but I found it interesting that that's such a commonly used phrase without further specificity.
And I'm sorry, Haley, the phrase attractive land utilization.
Yeah, exactly.
I have a suggestion. Well, first of all, in terms of the goals in the long range plan, I'm not sure which goals you're referring to, but one thing we could do is go more towards natural, looking more natural. So for example, having the grading be like upheld with big retaining walls and having it be like intense steps versus a more natural looking landscape. That might be something like to go towards more natural versus attractive might be like what's occurring in the natural landscape. I'm just trying to pick out of my brain, like what's in the comprehensive long range plan. And I think there is something about wanting to maintain the existing
like natural landscape
and landforms.
Sure. Yeah.
What was that, Haley?
Yeah, I'm sure the phrase like natural landscape is probably in there somewhere.
I do think maybe it makes sense not to refer to the long, or yeah, I don't know.
Well, there will always be a long range plan, so we can refer to the general document. It will just,
it's not clear like what in the document, like what it's referring to.
So is that attractive land utilization through the preservation of the natural landscape? And in accordance.
Maybe I'll call up the long range plan real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I admittedly did not go through the long range plan to like pick out certain things, but the last time I remember reading it, like I have no doubt that in there we reinforce the idea that like it's not attractive to go clear cut an entire like 30 acres, like that's not attractive in Concord. And in trying to work with natural landscape, I just imagine is in there. But.
Yes, maybe we can think about this for the next meeting. Maybe there's something better than the word attractive in the meaning of land utilization. So I'll highlight that and. I hate track changes. I really do.
And one of our goals was to make sure that there was language that the ZBA could rely on to make their objective decision, but that could allow them to use their evaluative judgment, right? So are we including enough language to do so? And so what I've read about the bylaws in general are they have to be written broadly enough that the board can exercise discretion, but still objectively enough to make a defensible decision. So have we struck that balance? I mean, I wish that council had kind of made some more recommendations about something that we could definitely, that the ZBA could fall back on for language.
So when thinking of this, it's the plan submitted in connection with the removal or filling are designed to minimize changes in the existing contours too. And if you go through the rest of, so this section right here is So this is, removal of or filling of earth subject to board approval. And so, these are the findings that the board has to make. So maybe it's, changes in existing contours to enhance, the preservation of protected trees as, under the tree preservation bylaw, which, that's not a good example because that's only within the setbacks, but, preservation of, trees, larger than, 6 inches DBH, or preservation of, I don't know, some other, other features that I can't think of right now. But to Kristen's point, that doesn't require extensive, retaining walls over 4 feet. That's, that's something that's in the board's subdivision rules and regs. So that's something that's very measurable. Or you could have, preservation of slopes, greater than, some percentage. So those are all, very measurable things that the board, criteria the board could easily use in making a finding.
And I can't remember, have we, I know I haven't, and I probably should have run this by the current ZBA board members to see if they had any suggestions on specific wording?
They don't get very many of these requests because most projects balance cut and fill on site.
Okay.
Elizabeth, one thing we could do is go look at, like, not saying that we at all like refer to LEED, but like there is a LEED neighborhood, development guidelines, and we could just see like if they have specific criteria that is recommended, just to get a sense for, like, because at the end of the day, like it is kind of, sustainability related that is what we consider like a, I think we're all agreeing is like attractive land utilization.
So getting to that point, maybe, maybe it's getting rid of all of these and starting with something better. So it's that enhances, the natural landscape through the preservation of trees, greater than, 6 inches DBH. Not having effective drainage, but existing contours to enhance the use of low impact design for stormwater drainage. Existing contours to enhance, something that's more like suitable road gradients. What's, to a developer, suitable road gradient is
whatever they want it to be.
Whatever they want it to be. So, so existing contours to, and let's get rid of the word enhance.
I would get rid of enhance, yeah.
Contours to allow for, adequate, or, acceptable road gradient. And, then it would be the fire department saying, yeah, that road gradient's fine. And instead of just, access, you can have, safe ingress and egress into a site. Or, so I think there's other words that would be better than the ones that are in there now. And
maybe talking about words, maybe the word terracing is important. Because when we're talking about slopes, doing terracing, that would be one way not to do earth removal and preserve the natural look of the landscape, and but still design it in a way. So I think terracing is, a lot of the issues that we had in some of the sites, terracing would be a nice way to approach this in landscaping, at least, but I don't know where it would fit, but I'm just saying that might be missing the
Well, so somebody could propose all the terracing that, you know, they want if, you know, if it didn't require any earth removal. If they were just, you know, balancing cut and fill on site, you know, they could, you know, they could terrace. So what I think, so like adding, you know, the criteria, you know, no retaining walls over, you know, 4 feet, or, you know, and so somebody has once shown that on a subdivision plan where they did, you know, a 4-foot retaining wall, 3 feet, a 4-foot retaining wall, 3 feet, a 4-foot retaining wall. So you would have to say, you know, something, you know, to provide the Board of Appeals to say, yeah, no, that's, you know, that's not allowed either. So I just think you definitely need to think about changing these criteria to be, you know, just something more, something more that the Board of Appeals can, you know, make those findings, and, you know, that, you know, aren't open to interpretation based on, you know, what a project is trying to accomplish.
I mean, that's really what we're after. And I think you listed a few. It's just trying to think about how can we capture them all in the next 2 weeks.
Well, if Haley's up to it, she and I can just go back and forth and you know, pull in, you know, town council, because, you know, if Haley and I can, you know, get through this, you know, by, you know, next, you know, Monday or Tuesday, you know, we can send this off to town council, and it wouldn't, or even Wednesday, wouldn't take much for them to review this and get back before the meeting on the 23rd.
Haley, is that doable for you?
Yeah, sure.
And I think that would help. I think that was your original intention, was trying to find, you know, some language with teeth in it that could be used for valuation. So it's just a matter of finding the right ones.
Yeah, and, you know, going beyond, like, okay, well, some engineer says it's okay. I mean, you know, engineering can do anything that they put their mind to. So, like, yeah, something that goes beyond, like, just sort of, is it safe? But, like, is this actually what we want? And, like, trying to define that.
Elizabeth, if I may make just one structural drafting comment. I think one of the things that I'm struggling with this is we're talking about minimizing changes to existing contours, and then we talk about enhancing all of these things that are kind of built or
yeah, so that's where, right? I was saying, I think, you know, you need to also get rid of the word enhance.
Yeah, I would maybe even just replace it with the word, you know, to preserve. And it could be, you know, to preserve the natural landscape, the existing drainage flows, you know, the I don't know how you make suitable road gradients work. I don't think access has anything to do with this. But then you know, other design considerations as well. So I think that it's just structuring it that way will make it a little less clunky, and maybe take the emphasis off things that a developer can come along and say, well, I am making suitable road gradients. I have plumbed the property properly. Rather, we're saying, don't change the existing drainage. Don't change the existing topography. Anyway, just might make it easier.
Yep, I agree.
Okay.
That's why I struggle with this section. Like I said, the first time around, Elizabeth, I had to read it like 12 times before I could even like attempt to understand what was going on here.
Yeah, the stem definitely needs help.
So what would also be nice is if, you know, each of the board members just took this first sentence and then just listed, you know, your thoughts about A, B, C, and D, and just send those to me. And then Hallie and I can, start pulling together things, because how one of you, looks at something and has an idea can be completely different than how somebody else looks at it and interprets it. And I think that would that's going to make this list for Hallie and I to be able to like narrow it down into very specific criteria that the Board of Appeals can utilize. Does that make sense?
So we should send it to you by Friday. Is that good enough? Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't put a lot of thought into whether it's grammatically correct, or just put down an idea, and then and then I'll run with it and then work with Hallie. Does that sound reasonable to everyone? You got a thumbs up?
All right.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
And then we don't, and so and then so I don't think any of these other comments are I thought this was a good addition, or the number of vehicle trips required for such operation. Then I'm going to have to ask about this last comment, because I don't understand. So this last comment is, this seems like a very general addition and is already captured in the more detailed provisions above. I recommend cutting it. So this statement that will endanger general health, safety, or welfare, or constitute a public nuisance, is nowhere up here. So I'm going to ask town council to be just for their reasoning on this comment. But it may be that it may be that, like, this constitute a public nuisance, we may be able to, up in this list, let's come up with a measurable item for what is a public nuisance. And so, we'll do a little research, and, or maybe just, Merriam-Webster has a, really great definition of what a public nuisance is. So, but I will ask for clarification on that statement, because I just kind of don't understand.
Elizabeth, I don't see that statement as newly introducing the idea of a public nuisance. I see it as the standard of review, establishing the standard of review. And I'm wondering, in other words, the boards, if there's a finding of those three things, the board cannot weigh whether they're outweighed. Nonetheless, that risk is outweighed by a benefit. They just can't issue the permit, period.
So I don't understand what this already captured in the more detailed provisions above. Well, I don't see where this statement is captured anywhere up above.
Well, let's see. And what I'm just wondering, so it says
just immediately above.
Well, the board, so they can require various things they deem necessary for public health, safety, convenience. But we go up to the top of the bylaw where it says, I'm wondering what the word is. The board shall consider. Like, where does it say further up? I'm wondering where it says any person. Well, okay.
She's also saying recommend. She's not saying you must. So for whatever that's worth. We could just ignore. We could ignore her recommendation to delete it.
I mean, I'm wondering where is the thing that essentially says the board will have the person who desires to remove, but shall. that says that the board shall consider, or what the board's authority is here to take these things into account. But
yeah, I see. That's what I don't understand. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah,
already captured in more detail above.
And maybe this is, maybe may have just keyed in on the words general health, safety, welfare, endangerment. I think that this is doing a different thing, which is saying that the board's hands are tied if a finding of those is found, that a permit cannot issue, not that there can be a balancing of risks and benefits.
Okay, I will.
And with that, on that point, I would suggest keeping it in.
Okay, I will ask.
Beans.
Okay. Any other comments?
Not done yet.
Oh.
Okay. So the one added question deals with where. Sorry. So where did we have air quality?
I think up at the very top.
Oh.
Maintain air quality.
Air quality. So I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second. And so town council added the one substantive question remains how the town intends to address air quality issues. As we read it, there are no specific provisions in this section targeted directly at air quality. So it's not clear how an applicant will be deemed to meet the purpose of this section or not. I worry that this could either be expanded by some people to include all air impacts, including greenhouse gas emissions from normal truck traffic, or shrunk by some others to mean only particular bothersome air quality issues, such as excessive dust or soot from diesel idling or emissions. And then further clarification was provided that says there is a potential issue with respect to air quality. Generally speaking, local regulations of emissions is preempted by the Clean Air Act. So to the extent the earth removal bylaw, by adding in protection of air quality as one of the purposes of the section, regulation emissions that may be preempted, and the Attorney General may not approve that specific language. So it's to the extent to which the revisions of the bylaw actually are intended to regulate emissions is unclear, given that we do not see any specific provisions targeting to maintaining air quality beyond that introductory language.
And Elizabeth, remind me, did we take this from, there was a number of other bylaws, earth removal bylaws that had that specifically, right? So, and I think it's been around for a long time, probably not in the same context that it's now being brought up, Noah, as the town council is doing, but it's, I see their point, and I thought the same thing, but I just was curious if you remembered, exactly which other bylaws had the same exact language.
not off the top of my head. So I think that gets back to, again, in that finding section, the A, B, C, and D, you have some type of measurable criteria that doesn't run afoul against the Clean Air Act. So it's, and I just can't wrap my head around that right now. So I think it's something, need to look into a little bit more.
I mean, I think it definitely goes hand in hand with the number of trips, and that's later on in there is what I think we're trying to get at, the air quality issues associated with more truck traffic than should be necessary. So yeah, I agree. We'll have to find other language. I don't see another way around that. But I mean, if we've got the other part in there as well.
Yeah, and as I sit here and think, it's like, so I mean, air quality is a very difficult thing, because it there is the Clean Air Act, there is state regulations that preempt, and so local bylaws can't go against that. So I think finding a criteria is going to be kind of difficult, and it may be it may be looking at maybe some of DEP's whether they have some standard that if some standard is hit, that it something is then determined to be a health or safety, or an air quality impact to health and safety. Maybe that's a standard that is measurable. But then also, I think you can easily put something in there, to Kristen's point about the trips and the traffic. You can easily put something in there where that there's no degrading of any level of service on any local roads or intersections. So if a
due
project
to construction, sorry, Elizabeth, you're
what?
saying no degrading due to construction impacts?
Yes, due to the number of
on local roads or state roads.
Well, it'd be for local roads.
I think there's an issue there with. I think there's an issue there. I don't know if we can say that.
So I think there's things we have to think about.
Yeah. Well, another avenue, you were going towards DEP. One thing to look at is like after emission controls, like with certain state programs, the contractors are required to like retrofit construction vehicles so that they have emit fewer.
Yeah, we're definitely not going there in a zoning bylaw. Because that's a zoning bylaw is not the purpose to make sure construction vehicles have been retrofitted.
Okay. So it could be
but I'm
like
just talking
an
about
incentive, like if, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if we're talking about, so yeah, it's either trips or it's looking at emissions of the type of vehicle you're using, or what your emission system is. So absent those two things, I don't.
No, I'm not talking about looking at emission systems. We're not going there. That is, that is something so beyond zoning. Zoning is talking about the use. I'm talking about if somebody is requesting an earth removal or an earth filling where, the number of trucks, that are coming in and out, and they could have the most efficient trucks, from an emission standpoint, but there's so many of them going in and out in a shorter period of time that it it does create some type of air quality issue under a DEP standard. That's what I'm talking about. That's a measurable thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not talking about emissions from vehicles. I'm just saying, if they, come in and there's, the list of number of vehicles that they're doing in that period of time, there has to be some, measurement that says, okay, well, that type of vehicle has this type of emissions range, and, that many trips in and out with that many vehicles in that period of time is going to trigger some DEP, air quality standard. That's what I'm talking about, is an air quality standard.
All right, well, thank you, Haley and Elizabeth, for taking this back to the drawing board one more time. And thank you to the board for weighing into Elizabeth with kind of your initial brainstorm ideas about criteria. Let's get that to her as soon as we can so that she can use that for the continuation of that list. Anything else on that one? Did we want to look at the explanation?
Sure. And then just the question whether you want to take public comment after each discussion or at the end. Yeah,
I guess I'd like to take it after each discussion. I don't want to wait too long while people are thinking of their ideas.
Hang on one second.
So we'll look at the explanation, then we'll open it up for public comment. If you have a comment, you can use the raise hand function, I believe, and then we will allow you to unmute yourself so you can state your name and address for the record. So reminder to newer board members, for each of the warrant articles, we always include an explanation, which is kind of a little summary, obviously, of why we're proposing this. It helps to clarify any, particularly when bylaw language itself is not terribly self-explanatory.
I think it's a good explanation.
I think it's a good explanation. Which I would like the board to know that before my time, warrant articles were submitted. They did not include an explanation, so people didn't get to understand the reasoning for it until the public hearing and at town meeting when the planning board issued their report. So I think this way of doing things makes things just so more efficient, especially at the public hearing, because people have already looked at the warrant and can come with their questions. So I think this, the better explanations that you can put with each of your warrant articles just facilitates the conversation at the public hearing and makes things easier, better for town meeting.
Okay.
But I do agree. I think this is, this is a very concise and good explanation. But if, over the next week, as you're thinking about things, if there's other suggestions, this is the easiest thing to change.
All right, thank you. All right, so there is some public comment. I see Ms. Dritt has her hand up. Ms. Dritt?
Hi.
Yep, state your name
Pamela
and address
Dritt.
for the record, please.
13 Concord Green, Unit 4. Thank you very much for all your hard work. I want to applaud the idea of using such sustainability language that is also in other neighboring areas, because I think it's important for you as the board and for us as the town to have some discretion. Right now, we don't have discretion to require certain like net zero building for new construction. But we should have the discretion to deny special things like earth moving permits for those sustainability principles. you can always, that will allow us to make exceptions for really good developments that we would not have to make for ones that are not so good. And I think that you should have the ability to use judgment as to whether the project itself is good enough to allow you to let it go through like you're doing. Like, I think I support these changes.
Thank you, Ms. Dritt. I don't see any other hands up right now, so we will continue. There's a couple more articles about which there's going to be probably less discussion, but we want to make sure we take a look at the explanations and make sure they're clear. Do you want to put up the floodplain next, or whatever one you have up next you can pull up, please, Elizabeth?
So the changes for the tree bylaw, these are just the recommendations that the reviewing agent made. And then I find this very difficult to read, so and the town manager's office may, make this one long paragraph again just to save space, but I find it very difficult to read that way. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Unless anybody has any other.
Anyone on the board have questions or suggestions to improve the explanation? And then I'll open it up for public comment. I'm seeing no questions or suggestions from the board, and I'm not seeing any hands up from the public about this one. So we can continue to the next bylaw, and we'll look at the explanation for that one as well. If anything occurs to anyone between now and the next meeting, please let Elizabeth know.
Yeah, and
oh, wait, I do see a raised hand. It looks like Sue Felshin.
Hi, Sue Felshin, 19 Sunnyside Lane. If that was an explanatory box there was a tiny typo in it. It said A requirements, plural. So it should be either requirements or a requirement.
So I'm gonna, all right, hang on one second. So hopefully, Sue, you'll have a chance to look at these before the warrant closes.
It's number 3. It's in number 3, the last sentence.
Email them to me and I will read with like an eagle-eyed bastard.
Elizabeth, I think we might have found our proofreader.
Yeah.
For,
including.
No, it should be including as a requirement, singular.
Singular. Okay. Perfect.
All right, thank you. All right, so next up.
Okay. So just to remind everybody, this was something that the Economic Vitality Committee had sent an email to the Planning Board for their consideration. And so this is, and I don't think this is the most recent one. It's not. So hang on one second. No. So sorry about that. I thought we had put the most recent one up on the website, but okay. Does somebody have, for some reason, I cannot find. Oh, maybe that was the right one. I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to have my husband open the door. It's becoming very hot in my basement. Okay. So I sent an email to the board with, there were, a lot of questions from the last meeting. And so I was able to speak to the public health director, the select board's office, and the building commissioner, and sent the email to everybody with all the additional questions you had about how this was working this past year with the select board issuing emergency permits to allow this. And so I'm not sure how the board wants to proceed with this bylaw amendment.
So I appreciate the that this was brought to us from the Economic Vitality Committee, and I for one love outdoor seating, and I'm glad that the restaurants have been able to utilize this through the special permits from the select board, and it was very helpful to obtain that additional information you have. So I guess I'd want to hear from the board first. With any questions that they have about the information that Elizabeth said. I guess one thing that I thought about this is, changing zoning to allow this. I guess normally we have much more time to evaluate our proposed amendments. And although I think this could be a good one, I am a little concerned that we're not giving this its proper due diligence and thinking about what it's going to impact and things like that. So I might be in favor of doing some more work on this, knowing that the special permit from the select board for the outdoor restaurants would still be in effect, until they decide it is no longer needed. I'm sure that's related to, pandemic and health measures. And that would give us, the board, more time to evaluate what the potential changes would impact. That's kind of what I've been thinking about lately, but I want to make sure I hear from board members in terms of, how do you feel about moving this article this season? Does anybody think that there's more information to be gained, or does anybody feel strongly about not moving this article based on kind of the information that we have so far? So let me open that up to the board.
Kristen, I think that's a really astute comment. I feel the same way as you. I think that it would be great to enable outdoor seating in Concord. I'm not sure going after the parking requirement here and under the present on short notice is I'm not feeling there yet. And I'm as you know, I'm often somebody who thinks our parking requirements are excessively onerous and based upon an outdated model. My concern here, though, is a huge amount of the feedback or the public comment we do get around projects is around parking and traffic. And I could imagine, Elizabeth, was I correct in understanding the public health director's feedback that the seating would need to be in private outdoor space, but and not in parking areas? Is that correct?
So the public health director, it's based on the health code.
Mm-hmm.
Only deals with restaurants being able to safely serve food.
Right.
She doesn't care where it is. Yeah. The food license they get, they have to be in control of, the premises for their food license. And right. So that's why, so.
Can't be on the public sidewalk.
So yes, so it couldn't be on the public sidewalk. Maybe it could be on, Main Street Cafe, the alley that goes down the side of Main Street Cafe is actually town-owned land. But, there's been, basically it's, a very long-standing, lease or, agreement that, allows Main Street Cafe to have those couple of tables that are out there. And, they are able to be in control of that space and serve food safely to that area. And that's all the, public health and the food code deals with. The issue of you could not have outdoor seating in a parking lot, in parking spaces that are required under the zoning bylaw for all of the uses of that site.
Mm-hmm. So the rated capacity is a one and done thing. They can't. Can they reduce their indoor seating requirements by taking seats out?
Yes. So there are the Colonial Inn.
Yeah.
Does that every year when they have their patio seating.
Uh-huh.
They remove seating inside the Colonial Inn, except for this past summer, which was under the the executive orders and the emergencies. But previously, yes, it's you calculate the required parking based on one space per 3 seats and each employee on the largest shift. So yep. I'll give you the perfect example. Trails End Cafe and the Millbrook Terry. They actually have relief from parking. So every one of those spaces in that parking lot is allocated to one of the different uses on that site. Mm-hmm. So Trails End Cafe could not put outdoor seating as they did this past summer under the executive order and the state of emergency in parking spaces because those are already allocated for for existing uses. So
they can't. I mean, what I was wondering is if somebody could can they unallocate those by removing seating in the restaurant on a temporary basis, and with the result being that they could say, all right, we had 100 seats inside. During the summer, we're going to remove 50 of those seats, and we're going to put 50 outside, but they're putting them in the parking spaces. So their parking requirement goes down. They still have 100 diners, and they've lost half their parking. Do you follow?
I do.
I only raise the point because, to go back to Kristen's question, I think that there are additional things we should be poking at here, and feedback from. I mean, we haven't heard. We're hearing from the Economic Vitality Committee, which is great. Which is I'm sure is expressing the voice of restaurants. But I think that people need to know about this as a proposal and have the opportunity for public comment. I think.
That and your point about general parking requirements, which has been on our list to look at. So perhaps this could be a more holistic approach if we actually do change the parking requirements as a bigger picture item. And then it would actually impact the ability for an amendment about seasonal outdoor dining to actually be improved.
But isn't the point that, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like, isn't the point that this is needed now? Like, presumably, like, the restaurants all believe this is dearly needed given the current time that we're in, and like
they have it now, though, effectively under the emergency order.
But I think it's been so successful that it's like, why not keep it? You know, and well, people do like it.
So why not keep it? So out of all of those, that list of restaurants that got permits from the select board, only Paparazzi and Adelita's have the ability to put outdoor seating in an existing parking lot that has excess parking. Every other one of those restaurants was either putting additional outdoor seating on a public sidewalk and barricading off parking spaces so that you maintained your ADA access, or Karma blocking off an actual travel, driveway into the parking lot and back, which under normal circumstances you can't do that. That parking lot behind Karma, you cannot have the only way to get in and out of that parking lot is the little 1-car lane driveway that goes on the side of Dunkin' Donuts. That's not feasible. Under the emergency order and during a pandemic, yes, it's feasible. There were very limited cars. So even Trails End Cafe, yes, they were able to add additional outdoor seats and take over those parking spaces. But when this is all over, the select board, they're not the ones that can issue a permit to allow outdoor seating, unless that's not what's allowed under zoning. So you either have to, you basically have to look at the parking requirements and deal with the parking requirements and the number of parking spaces required for various uses. To Burton's question, could Trails End Cafe get rid of all of their seating in their restaurant? Let's say there's 100 seats in the restaurant, and then only add 50 seats outside, which effectively would reduce, I don't know how many parking spaces, but let's say that reduces the required parking for the restaurant by 5, and then make an outdoor seating area. Yeah, they could. They'd have to go through site plan approval to create that outdoor seating area. Because you're changing the layout of the parking. Could they do that right now? Yeah, they could do that right now. But there's very few restaurants that are going to remove that number of seats to create outdoor seating sufficient enough to change their parking requirement. The Colonial Inn, does it, that's been, a non-conforming use as far as their parking. So we're only talking about, I don't know how many seats the porch holds, but there's a lot of seats in the Colonial Inn. So putting 20 seats on the porch doesn't effectively change the number of seats inside the Colonial Inn because it's so high. But for something like Trails End Cafe to change, you're talking 1 space per 3 seats. So to reduce 4 seats, they're, to take 12, what is that? 3, yeah, is that 12?
They had 35 seats.
No, but to take 12 seats out of the restaurant?
To reduce the parking.
To reduce their parking? But that would be if they met the parking requirements.
Right.
They have a relief from parking already. So I think it is a slightly, bit more complicated It's a little bit more complicated. And I think to, also to Kristen's point, one parking space per 3 seats has probably been around since, I don't know how long that's been a parking requirement. I can't even remember the last time the parking requirements were even updated. So, industry standards, may be, that it's, really it's 1 space per 4 seats. And if that level of change, if that's more consistent with how restaurants are, operating these days, then change the parking requirement, and that will open up, the ability for restaurants to add more seats, and they can choose whether it's inside or outside. Because you have to understand, and this was something that I sent the board, the number of seats that's in a restaurant is, based on, 4 different factors. It's 1, how the restaurant owner wants to lay out their restaurant. 2, the building code says if you have sit-down seats, you need square footage in that area, a certain amount. If it's a high top, standing, you need this amount. So if somebody has 100 square feet, the building code's going to say, okay, this is the number of seats you can have based on the types of seats and the square footage. And then you're going to throw in ADA requirements. You have to be able to have, aisle widths. And so that's going to, change, the amount of seats that, can fit into a specific space. So I'll stop talking now.
So let's make sure we hear from anybody else on the board with questions or comments. Does anyone feel strongly that we continue to debate this and to put it on the warrant for this town meeting?
So I just want to make sure I understand. So is the issue with how it's the warrant is written right now, is it that it basically for other than a handful, if that restaurants, it functionally wouldn't make a difference? Is that what I'm understanding? Because they can't, they either don't have the parking to use or they're already granted relief, so they functionally don't have the parking to use. I'm trying to understand why this particular warrant would not work as written. And I think I'm in line with what you were saying, but I just want to make sure.
So the list that the select board's office sent of those restaurants, only Adelita's and Paparazzi, was able to have outdoor seating in their existing parking lot. Just got your permit, put it up. All the others required, many of them required Jersey barriers to be put up, to taking parking spaces off a public way. So, Main Street, Cafe had additional seats out front and Jersey barriers were put up. Woods Hill Table, they put up Jersey barriers and, had outdoor seating in their parking lot. But in a non-emergency, non-pandemic period of time, those spaces, they have relief from parking already because of the public spaces on the road. So they already don't meet the requirement of parking. So they would have to go to the Board of Appeals to seek further relief from parking. And I don't see how you could make the justification during normal times for further relief from parking to add additional seats and remove the existing parking that you have. So that's, Helen's doesn't have parking, Cafe Nero doesn't, Fiorello's doesn't, 80 Thoreau doesn't, Main Street Cafe doesn't. So Saltbox Kitchen doesn't, Woods Hill Table doesn't. So
what's the concern?
So to Nathan's question, I'm not sure. I think there needs to be something else besides this warrant article to make it effective for all these restaurants.
Right.
So Elizabeth, when, like, not to be too dense, but so if they don't have enough parking, then is the concern that the cars go into residential side streets and then people, or what's the concern when there's not enough parking?
Parking is a very sacred thing to many people.
I don't doubt it.
But I mean, it's required. Each there's a use for each business or so forth. And then depending on the use, there's a certain amount of required parking that they need to show that they have. And if they can't demonstrate that, then they have to ask for relief of parking. So, once they've, demonstrated, so for each of those buildings that we see on any of our streets, each of them kind of have already said, this is how many parking spaces that we have, and therefore it's okay to, have this use here. And so if we were saying, you're retaining the use you have, but we're no longer requiring that same parking requirement for the use. We're making an exception, a further exception for relief of parking. Then we're just kind of disregarding the use table in general, which, is what obviously we get a lot of complaints about, because when people come and say, there's no parking, I keep driving by and I can't park there. So that's that separate issue. And so I think that's what it is trying to adhere to the bylaws we have as written right now, knowing that we probably should update the use table or for the parking requirements per use in more a holistic.
To your point, Kate, as well. But yeah, part of that is if the people's idea is that if there's not enough parking right at that restaurant, then yes, it's going to spill over on the residential streets, and it's going to create additional traffic because people are just going to drive around and around and around, and everybody drives in their own car, and sadly there is that mentality about parking, and that every business should have available parking right in front of their business because nobody wants to walk. So those are the perceptions. So part of the problem with looking at a bylaw amendment that introduces some discussion about parking is those misperceptions, and being able to, for the planning board, if you're putting something forth, to be able to defend your zoning bylaw amendment. And I don't think we're there yet.
Okay, so it's interesting that you called it a misperception.
It is a misperception.
Oh, good. Well, then we shouldn't be so eager to get into it. So if this is an opportunity to change the vitality of our downtown areas, West Concord and Concord, I don't know if we should be so.
But this bylaw doesn't do that.
Oh, it doesn't allow restaurants to have outdoor seating?
Yeah, so that was my question.
A restaurant right now can have outdoor seating.
But once the Board of Selectmen loses their emergency special permit thing, then
no.
Or a restaurant can, if they can meet the parking. Is that what the next part of that statement is?
A restaurant can have currently.
Oh, right, but we're
seating.
We're incentivizing it, is what I'm saying.
Well.
Or making it easier. Isn't that the point?
So I think it's the point is, you're correct, Kate, to make it easier. But when you look at the actual restaurants that could utilize this, we're down to 2 in town. And while there is certainly, I would agree with Elizabeth, a misperception on parking scarcity, when we have had businesses that have had a change of use or have otherwise buildings that have had a change of use or for other reasons have had to obtain parking relief. There was very vocal opposition for some of the reasons outlined here, which was people would park on residential streets. Other businesses would be impacted because their customers would not be able to park. And there was a cafe in Concord Center. There was the development where Trails End is. And then there's also the issue of that there are restaurants that have, and other businesses that have had to accommodate the existing parking use table and are having to pay for parking offsite for their employees. And it seems to be that, we should be doing this in a more comprehensive manner that addresses all of that public feedback we've had previously, and also actually accomplishes the goals of increased economic vitality. This seems to only affect 2 businesses.
So Burton, based on what you were saying, with the exception of the issue of businesses having to lease, parking offsite for their employees, the other parts never really came to pass. Yes, every single time something comes up about a new development, there's people who will complain about parking. And then guess what? The development goes in and it's just like it was before. We've not yet had something that makes such a drastic change. I mean, I remember right before I started, it was all about Cafe Nero, that was just gonna run amok with parking all over the place. It didn't. It's exactly the same when I walk down there as it is all the time. So I think there are 2 things for me. One, I think there's I think we would agree there's an over prioritization of parking than there needs to be. And that, we should be taking sort of a leadership position on this. We know what the result is. We know the direction we want things to go. We agree, I think, on the fact that we want more outdoor seating. What I'm hearing is that this particular warrant article is only going to address 2 restaurants functionally. But that said, I worry that if we don't do something now, and then the emergency goes away, things go back to the way they were, and the moment we even mention doing something with parking and relief, or extending relief to allow for this to go back to having outdoor dining, we will not get, public support for it because it will be overrun with people talking about parking issues. So I think there's an opportunity to do something now. So even if it only gets to affect 2 restaurants, there's a foothold in the door, and you can say, look, this works in this way. Let's expand it next year when we have time to think about it more broadly and address the parking issue then. But I worry if we just set everything aside now, we will not come back to it. And even if we do, we won't be able to get it through.
Excellent points, Nathan.
Thanks, Nathan. And I mean, it is on our goals that we are supposed to be working on parking. Like, I think it's been on there for a couple of years, is that we need to more comprehensively. I think the traffic study, or the parking study, excuse me, was from 2016 maybe. So the big picture is still on our radar to do. Ellen, Haley, Linda, any other questions from you guys to kind of clarify? I know the issue is a bit confusing, but basically, do we think, what are your thoughts on moving this year in terms of, being a productive contribution?
I agree with Nathan's point completely. I completely support what he said. So that's my take.
Yeah, I agree as well. I mean, worst that can happen, right? This is a super short amendment, so not much time had to be spent on it, hopefully, it seems, and in terms of like the drafting and everything. So the worst that can happen is like it gets voted down. And I think even Elizabeth said a week or two, or a session or two ago, like, if it like something happens and it's awful, like we get rid of it the next time around.
Kate, thoughts?
Yeah, I guess my thought would be to bring it to the public hearing, and then if the concern is with, you know, well, hear what people have to say.
Okay. Burton, having heard all that, what are your thoughts?
I don't feel particularly strongly about this one. I thought you made a good case that this would be something that we would want more information on, but I would not stand in the way of moving this forward. I would beg off presenting it at town meeting, but I would be, I think Nathan made some great points. I think he should present.
I think I heard a volunteer, indeed. Okay, well, given that the majority of the board is in support of this, I can get behind that as well. And I think if we need more information for the public hearing, I'm sure we can count on the Economic Vitality Committee. And let's just try to get, all of our information, all of our facts straight, because we will get a lot of questions about this and how it's going to impact parking and what's going to happen here and there and stuff like that.
So what I'd like to do is work with Nathan on expanding the explanation a little bit based on the information I sent the board today. And just see if we can, we can add a little bit additional factual information. I don't know if it's possible. I'm just saying, whether, we can just add to the explanation.
Nathan, can you take that on in the next few days?
Yeah, I think that's fine. And also, I think whether we actually put it in there or not at the town meeting, we should, clarify that currently under, the emergency, it will continue on sort of as is. I worry that there will be confusion that if it gets voted down and then people see outdoor seating, so what's going on? Just so that they understand that that continues on as long as the emergency is in place.
And then let's open it up to the public. Okay, go ahead. And then I'll open it up to the public after that. Kate? Oh, no. All right. So if you have a question or a comment, public, please use the raise hand function. We will call on you. And as mentioned, there is a public hearing for all of these, so you can certainly get your arguments in order, your questions in order then as well. So I don't see any hands. So Elizabeth, you want to move to the floodplain explanation? And then we'll wrap it up with two family.
So you already did two family. I mean, you already did floodplain.
I did floodplain. Sorry, what was the other? Oh, we did tree bylaw. I didn't think we did.
No, you did.
Okay, wonderful. We are so much more efficient than I even realized.
Okay, so this is the planning board's proposed amendment to 4221. This amendment is separate from the amendment that the board discussed at the last meeting that Kevin Hurley brought forward. And they will move forward, should the board decide, as two separate warrant articles. So that if, for two reasons. One, so there doesn't need to be an amendment on the floor of town meeting if somebody disagrees with one part and agrees with another part, and they can move forward independently. Town council may disagree. I don't know, but that's going to be my recommendation, to move forward so that there is no confusion with the two. And so this is the planning board's that was postponed from last year to allow two family in the resident C zone district. And the highlighted part is what was added based on last meeting's discussion on parking. And what the board talked about was just requiring one parking space for each two family. And after discussions with the building commissioner, we felt it was more appropriate to include this waiver provision, which is already in the zoning bylaw for combined business residents, So it's already an established process, and it actually gives the Board of Appeals more flexibility to, determine, whether, one parking space is appropriate or not. So.
And procedurally, this means they're coming forward with an application asking for 2 special permits, but the same amount of effort's involved, right?
It's only one special permit. And it's whether that special permit is they request a waiver to reduce the parking spaces or not.
Well, I mean, so they're coming to us for a special permit to build a 2-family, right? So they've got to come before the board regardless, right? Correct. And then this is saying they'd also need to make part of their permit application a request for a parking relief, effectively.
If they want.
Yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. It doesn't seem like this on its own would discourage somebody from being creative with, if they've already got to come to the board to build the 2-family. I like it. I can hear somebody's cat.
Yeah, sorry. Let me mute her. Other questions? Is everybody?
If I can go back, Elizabeth, refresh me the difference between this and the one that was presented by Mr. Hurley.
Wait, before you do that, hold on. Because I spent a lot of time untangling it in my brain earlier. So it was functionally different. So let's talk about this one first, if that's okay. And make sure everybody has their head wrapped around this. It's funny because we were all set to move this last year. It comes up in front of me again this year, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, what is this? And do I understand, what we allowed right now? And so, especially for the newer board members, any questions about, what we're proposing, which is kind of the second paragraph here. And there is an explanation that Elizabeth has that says, we really are trying to encourage the smaller dwelling units, and so in this certain town zone, so the residency would hit that, and then she's added the part about why we're actually tacking on the part about parking. But as written, particularly with the new part about parking, are there any other questions from Linda, Haley, Kate, Alan, Nathan? And Nathan, I can't remember if you proposed this one last year or if it was Burton.
It was slated for me, and then we didn't put it through. So
okay. So you're going to be busy this year.
Oh, you want me to do this one too?
Yeah, I'm thinking I'm going to just have you do all of them since you're up there anyway. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions from the board members, which means that it's clearer for you than for some reason it was for me. And it might be because then I got it tangled with kind of the other comment from Mr. Hurley, which Elizabeth has some clarification about. So it sounds like we're ready to move over to the other one now. So this is the article that the planning board is going to move. And then the other one is the one we're going to discuss whether we're planning to move or not, or amend and move.
The hand up.
Oh, there, okay. So should I, okay, yep, let me take a moment, if it's okay, to take public comment about this one before we kind of move on to the other one. Sue Felshen, can you unmute?
Yes, Sue Felshen, 19 Sunnyside Lane. I have another persnickety comment. If you can go back up to 4.2.2.1, at the very end of the highlighted yellow text, it says the neighborhood in which it is to take place. But a two-family dwelling does not take place. And I think that needs to be reworded as either in which it is to be located, or simply strike that whole "in which" phrase.
And leave it to, and stop it injurious to the neighborhood, period.
Is my suggestion, but up to you, of course.
Any objections from planning board? I think that's a helpful suggestion. Less is always more.
I like it, Sue.
Thank you. All right.
before you move on, I'm going to clarify what this means. So this section of the zoning bylaw has been in the zoning bylaw. I believe I haven't been in the office to go back and look at the 1928 bylaw, but it's been in the zoning bylaw, I think, from the beginning. The original section, the original bylaw said that the board may grant a special permit for the alteration and use of a building existing at the time its lot is placed in a single residence district, which for most of the town of Concord is prior to 1928 when the first zoning bylaw was adopted. For not more than 2 dwelling units, provided the, and it now says gross floor area, excluding the basements, shall not exceed, or any addition shall not exceed in all 1/5 of the gross floor area. The original provided that the volume, it used to say volume of any addition shall not exceed in all 1/5 of the volume of the existing building. I think it was 2016, this was changed to be gross floor area, and then also inserted the excluding basements, open and screen porches and decks, so that this was consistent with the maximum floor area ratio bylaw that was adopted. Nowhere else in the zoning bylaw does it ever reference volume. So that became a very difficult for the building commissioner, because you had this one section that talked about volume, but then everywhere else in the zoning bylaw was talking about gross floor area. So that's how this section got amended to be gross floor area, excluding basements, open screen porches, and decks. Nowhere else in the zoning bylaw currently are 2 families permitted to be constructed by right. You can only have, this is the only section currently where somebody can, by special permit, take an existing structure that was built prior to 1928 and to convert it into a 2-family. That's it. You can't have a 2-family in the town of Concord. 4222 is the accessory dwelling unit. You can have an accessory dwelling unit, but as the board knows, that's just an additional dwelling unit in an existing house. The owner has to live in one of the units. You can't divide them off deed and sell, either one of them. For this section, somebody could create a 2-family in this structure that was built prior to 1928. You can condoize it and you can sell both of them off. But that's it as far as 2 families in the town of Concord. This section here that the board is adding is basically changing that to say that now 2-family dwellings will be allowed by special permit in the resident C zone district, regardless of whether it's built in 1930, whether it's brand new construction. So that's what this new paragraph allows. Does anybody have any questions? Does that explain it, Burton?
Oh yeah, I got it. I think my question was just to getting a refresher on Mr. Hurley's comments about garages.
Okay, so that's going to be next. So nobody has questions on that difference? So,
it was much more clear to everybody but me. So thank you though.
So what I now will do is I will bring up what Kevin, Mr. Hurley was talking about. And Kristen and I had a long, detailed conversation about this, trying to go back and explain, what Kevin was intending. And based on that conversation, I called Kevin and said, Kevin, the bylaw amendment that you sent me that you're proposing, I don't think does what you are intending because of the addition of this word here. That word should not be there. That word should not be added. It is this word right here that he wants to add. And I'll explain. Without these two words, what it says is that if you have a building built before 1928, you can convert it to a two-family. You can do an addition to that structure to convert it, but that addition can only be 1/5 of the gross floor area of the existing structure, excluding basement, open or screen porches, and decks. So if you had a 1,000 square foot structure, excluding basements, open or screen porches, and decks, you could do an addition 1/5 of 1,000 square feet. So what is that, 200? 200 square feet. That addition, that 200 square feet, could be living area, it could be a garage. All of those things would count towards that 200 square feet. A basement, an open screen porch, or a deck would not count towards that 200 square feet. What Kevin is proposing is that 200 square feet, he would like garages to not count towards that 200 square foot addition. So, but he would like, if there is a garage, he wants the garage to be counted towards the existing gross floor area. So if you had 1,000 square foot structure, that existing structure that also had a 500 square foot garage, you'd be working with 1,500 square feet. 1/5 of that would be what you could do for an addition. And for that addition, you would not have to count a garage if you were going to add another garage. Does that make sense?
I get it, but I'm not sure I agree. I mean, imagine this.
No, I'm just clarifying what Mr. Hurley was asking the board to discuss. And it's this.
Okay. Well, I mean, because you could kind of, let's say you've got 1,000 square foot cape with a detached garage that was built on the property, right? And that is 500 square feet. Could you conceivably, that's your 1,500, what is that my denominator or numerator? Denominator, I think. And no, that's my numerator. And then you could then build a 300 square foot addition to the house using that garage as credit. And right? Oh, you're on mute again.
No, your existing building square footage that you get to take the 1/5 from is only the structure that was built before 1928. So there could be 15 structures on the property that were built in 1930 and one structure that was built in 1927. This provision only pertains to the building built in 1927. So it's only that structure built before 1928 that you get to utilize this provision.
How's that for clarification? It's complicated.
So you don't get to add all of the structures on the property into what is your existing square footage that you get to utilize, have the 1/5 addition. yeah, it's.
So how does that affect where you were going, Burton?
Well, I'm still just not quite clear. I mean, I get the idea of exclude. I mean, I think that his comment was that when you're updating a house, making it into a 2-family house, you might very well need to attach 2 garages to it, right? And that you almost, by definition, as it's currently drafted, can't do that, or it would be pretty rare circumstances that you could do that without exceeding this 1/5 gross floor area. It seems to me that there's some logic to saying garages shouldn't be excluded or shouldn't be included in the calculation, but it seems to me they shouldn't be included in the denominator or the numerator. I don't know.
So just one point, Burton, it's not just whether you had a single family dwelling built before 1928. It's any building. You could have a 500 square foot barn built before 1928, and you can apply for a special permit to convert that 500 square foot barn into a 2-family. Mm-hmm. You can do 1/5 of 500 square feet, that excluding a basement, open screen porch, or a deck. You could do an addition to that 500 square foot barn as part of your conversion. Let's say you had a barn that had an attached garage that was built before 1928, that was 1,500 square feet. You could do a addition that's 1/5 of 1,500 square feet. That 1/5, if you wanted to add another garage, that square footage gets calculated into that 1/5. What Kevin would like to do is you get credit if you have a garage for an existing structure, and then don't have to count it when you do your 1/5 addition. That's what this bylaw amendment is proposing. Have I made it any clearer, or have I
think I get it.
So I think now if what this bylaw amendment is doing is clear, then I think the board needs to discuss whether they agree with the proposed amendment and wish to move forward, or have reservations and don't wish to move it forward.
Right, keeping in mind that the intent of moving the 2-family is to encourage more smaller and more diverse homes. So, let's look at that through that lens.
Linda? I'm still a little confused, because I thought he was saying that that you could build a detached garage without being constrained, but you couldn't build you couldn't modify your structure to be a 2-unit dwelling with an attached garage.
Correct. That's correct.
Which I have to say, I walk around Concord a lot, and I see so many detached garages, including the one that I have, and I'm like, why do I have a detached garage in New England? So I understand his point, is that if we want to let people age in place, there shouldn't be a disincentive to have your garage detached somehow. When we get to the end of this, there should be, you shouldn't be penalized in terms of if you're going to renovate to not be able to include that garage space if if it's going to be detached, you shouldn't have an incentive or the zoning requirements shouldn't force you to have a detached garage if you wish to build one.
Well, it wouldn't force you to build a garage, but I think I understand what you're saying. If you are choosing to build a garage, then the only option might be to have a detached garage.
Right. I mean, unless I'm missing something that doesn't really.
No, you're not missing anything. That is exactly what Kevin is saying, and you're providing, you know, his reasoning, you know, that is part of, you know, his reasoning. So I think the problem that I have is that there's no limitation on what this, you know, what this excluding garages, there's no limitation to that. So you could have this old barn and somebody, you know, wants to get a special permit to, you know, convert it, and the bylaw says that you get to exclude the, you know, garage, and they propose that each unit has a 3-car garage, and that's not counted in the 1/5. You know, this is a special permit, and, you know, the Board of Appeals has to find that, you know, what you're proposing is not, you know, detrimental, you know, to the neighborhood. But again, I think, and Marcia and I have talked about this, you know, this has been in the zoning bylaw for so long, you know, we can't say what the explanation was when this was adopted. Marcia and I can only speculate. And we think, you know, 1/5 is a very low threshold. You know, 1/5 is not much of anything. We think it's because you have some of these really old barns, you know, old houses back then, other than, you know, some of the significant, you know, there were quite a few significant second home mansions in town, but for the most part, the homes built before 1928 were, you know, fairly modest, smaller homes. We speculate that the intent that this was placed at such a small threshold of 1/5 was because you wanted to allow these structures to be converted to 2 families, but you didn't want to drastically change, you know, the landscape or the neighborhood by allowing this. And 1/5 would be somebody has an existing barn and they want to do a small addition to create a second entrance, or so that's, you know, that's just our, you know, thinking. You know, you can make this bylaw amendment, you know, to say excluding, you know, 450 square feet of garage area, or I mean, you can place a limitation on that if, you know, because I can definitely see both sides. You know, I don't have a garage in my, you know, house and air, and it's just, you know, something you kind of live with. But, you know, my, you know, place up in Vermont, I have a garage, and wow, it is pretty nice to pull your car and not have to go outside when it's like, you know, wind chills minus, you know, 28. So I definitely see both sides. So more things to think about. And
yeah,
again,
good question.
You know, Kristen's, you know, point, this was presented to the board with only 3 meetings before town meeting. You know, is it something that the board wants to, you know, discuss further and not place on the warrant, or
yeah, what do other people think? Nathan, Alan?
Yeah, it's just,
I guess here.
I was just going to ask, so just just to be clear, we would be presenting this one along with ours, right? So we have sort of not dueling, but I guess complementary warrant articles on the two-family
section of the bylaw. Yes, they would be presented separately.
So the previous bylaw amendment would go first. The planning board's, two-family and residence C would go first, and then this would go second.
So, I mean, Linda, I think you helped to articulate it very well. And so, what we need to decide tonight, as Elizabeth said, is this an article that the planning board wants to put forward? So think about it. I'm gonna go around and ask people what they think, so we can get a sense of whether we're gonna put this on the warrant. We have one more meeting to finalize and decide. So let me kind of go around and ask folks. Burton, what's your initial reaction?
I wish we had the time and opportunity to sort of run hypothetical numbers to see what excluding the word garage in the second sentence does. I haven't quite figured it out in my own head. I think the concept of excluding garages for the reasons we were walking through in our last meeting makes sense, but this change has me a little confused.
Thank you. Alan, you have any thoughts?
I'm trying to process it still. I'm a bit confused also with this.
And so one of my concerns, based on my confusion and how much time I spent doing this and the initial reactions, and I'll go around to hear from everybody else, is what's going to happen when we present this at town meeting? Or is that just going to be, are we going to spend so much time trying to explain it to people that it really kind of almost defeats the purpose? But let me continue along. Haley, what are your thoughts?
I don't know if I have a strong opinion yet on this. So this is again for only homes that were built prior to 1928. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, not just homes, structures. Any building. So a barn, a detached garage. The building commissioner has in the past said that, like an old chicken coop does not rise to the level of a building. So he has, but a one-car garage, that has been done before. A very small barn, that's been done before. So it's not just an existing dwelling. So I want to make that clear. It's any building prior to 1928.
Happy to have a stronger opinion next time.
All right, Kate.
If we can't understand this, I don't know how anyone else is going to, which is your point, Kristen. To Burton said something about hypothetical. If someone could please show me a hypothetical, then that would help me to understand. And I think if we have to figure out a way to make this easier to understand.
It needs a diagram or something, right, Kate?
Yeah, diagram with the hypothetical. Yeah.
And a picture, Elizabeth, of a house that nobody can quite figure out which one it is.
All right, Nathan.
Yeah, so I'll echo the concern around confusion at town meeting, particularly if it's following right on the heels of another one that is the same language. So yeah, And then I'm also still trying to fully understand what's being asked here. And I worry that if I'm understanding it correctly, I'm worried that this sort of, I think Elizabeth, you brought this up, that it may incentivize garages indirectly so that you end up like, oh, okay, three car garage for each unit. And I think that kind of goes against what we're trying to do. I understand what, the point that was made at the last meeting that, the 1/5 really limits what they can do if they're including the garage. But at the same time, if part of what we're thinking about is, smaller units and less car centric, then is this going against that if we're excluding the garage? Or am I misunderstanding this entirely, which is completely possible?
I think I share those sentiments. You can't answer them, but yes, sure. And Linda, having asked your clarifying question, which was really helpful, and then kind of hearing all the other comments, what are your impressions?
Well, I guess my impression is that this is something we should be able to wordsmith somehow, so that we're not giving incentives to build a small addition and then not, have to knock down a existing garage or build a separate garage that's separate from the house. It seems to me there should be some way to formulate that, but I can't think of it as I sit here.
All right, let's bring it back. I mean, Elizabeth, would it be possible for you to come up with some sort of a diagram to graphically illustrate this for us at the next meeting? Hold on, you're muted. Wait, one sec.
I can probably come up with an example. You still have Kate and her presentation to go through.
Right.
So I could probably at least come up with a mathematical example in the next few minutes.
Oh, okay.
Oh, what, Elizabeth?
Yeah.
We do like a little diagram and a hypo, and then maybe see if we can reword it, like for the next meeting.
Okay, I can do that.
Or does anybody else want to come back to this today?
I would rather let it sit with people and come back in the next meeting, but let me know if anybody disagrees. And then let me open it up to public comment in case there's anything that we missed. Please raise your hand if you have a comment about this particular proposed amendment. Sue Felshin.
Sue Felshin, 19 Sunnyside Lane again. Since this is for residence C, well, no, it doesn't even matter that it's residence C. It seems to me that if garages are excluded, then someone can build a garage, but they're going to be somewhat constrained in being able to put on a 3-car garage or a 5-car garage, because so many of the properties in residence C aren't big enough to allow the garage anyway. There are, of course, a few oversized properties, even in residence C, but couldn't somebody already just apply to put in a 3-car garage just because they feel like wasting space on cars? So if the goal is to be less car-centric, then I applaud the idea of putting a size limitation, excluding garages to the degree of 450 feet or whatever the suggested language was. But otherwise, it doesn't seem to me that part of it is a big concern. And yeah, I think you're all right that a diagram would do wonders to clarify this. In fact, 2 diagrams, one showing what would happen if you did exclude garages and one showing what would happen if you did not.
So I think that this garage provision is not for residence C. It's for any zoning district, right, Elizabeth? Yeah, just this other piece we're looking at is allowing new construction of 2 families or conversion of houses built post post 1920 whatever ancient times in residency. This one would be in any district, so it could be in more capacious lots.
Okay, my mistake. But in that case, anybody with their gigantic mansion on some enormous property in Concord could already come to the town and say, yeah, I'd like to put a 30-car garage on my property for my car collection. So, you know, how I'm not sure I'm seeing how it's making it worse.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. All right, seeing no other hands up, I know, so thanks. There's plenty of work to do on the meeting on the 23rd with just kind of finalizing all the amendments before the warrant closes. So thank you to everyone for giving thought so that we'll be able to kind of make those final decisions then. And Kate, I know you've done a lot of work on looking at the effectiveness of the FAR. So thank you for putting something together. And we are looking forward to that discussion, which does, you know, have some impact on the two-family dwelling as well. But you know, let's see what she has to say first, please. Oh, but you're muted.
How does this work? Do I share my screen? Or
you can share your screen and then go through your slides, or I can bring it up and you can just tell me when.
I'm going to share my screen. I think I'm sharing.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I've been looking at FAR and this issue of tear down trends in Concord. And I'm expecting this to be a multi-part series, this being part one of our board talking a little bit more substantively about this issue, which otherwise comes up a lot. So today I'm hoping to just give an overview of what mansionization is and help to place our discussion in the context of what the town has been doing over the past 20 years to look at the issue and address the issue. And then focus a little bit on FAR, although it's, as not to steal my later punchline, but it's difficult to assess the effectiveness of the FAR. So we can talk about that later. So to start off with, mansionization, and I think that we're all familiar with it, is a trend in residential development where smaller homes and typically older homes are demolished and replaced with much larger homes. And we care about this from a planning perspective because of ecological impacts associated with increased lot coverage and resultant impervious surface increases, increased home size and attendant increases in the energy use relative to smaller homes, and the clearing of mature trees and other landscaping that supports wildlife habitat. There's also impacts to housing diversity, where we have smaller and less expensive homes turning over into much larger and much more expensive homes. And this also impacts the neighborhood character. So this is just a picture showing a typical incidence of a home being torn down and built into a larger home. This is Peter Spring Road, which is heading towards Bedford on Old Bedford Road, or Bedford Road rather. And you can see here a smaller ranch home. This is built in 1960. And then you have a circa 2017 home next to it. So the purpose of this slide is just to have a way to look at what the impacts are in terms of the building footprint and the size of the home. So on the left, you have this ranch house that's older, and the right is the newer, much larger home. So, and again, this was typical. I didn't look for like the largest home or the biggest spread. So in the chart, you see that the comparison of house A versus house B. In terms of gross floor area, the larger home is 222% larger. In terms of the living area, it's 250% larger. And then the footprint on the site is 76% bigger. So you can also just observe readily from looking at these pictures, things that you see typically with these rebuilds, which is you have a little retaining wall to manage the grading on the site, to accommodate the larger footprint. And also you usually have the clearing of most mature trees. Now we have the bylaw to protect from trees within the certain distance of the road, but you're still losing a lot of mature trees to both to accommodate the construction itself and also the layout of the new structure. So that's case study number one. Case study number two is in the same area of town. This is going further towards Bedford on Black Duck Road. This is a home that's under construction right now. It was purchased by a developer in 2017. And the existing home that was built in 1967 was demolished. And the site is outlined here on this map. And this slide shows you our subject property at 5 Black Duck Road, which is this new construction in the upper left-hand corner. And these are 3 direct abutters. And this, you can see this is the living area. The square footage listed there is the living area plus the garage. So you can compare that of the subject property versus these 3 abutters. So the new structure is a little under 4,700 square feet, and then you can compare it to these much smaller structures. This also lists the floor area ratio. So here you have this new house, which is very nearly maxing out the floor area ratio, and you can compare that to the floor area ratios of these other homes, which are much smaller and much more typical of these homes that were built in the 50s and 60s. That do not max out the FAR that's now allowed. So instead of, so for example, at 55 Butternut Circle, you have the smaller ranch home. The FAR is 0.05, and the maximum FAR allowed is 0.3. And the scale of these pictures isn't really helpful, but the effect from the street is like, wow, this home is much larger than these other homes. So this was the home that was torn down. You can see it's a split level. This is the view from the street, and you can also observe these mature trees that are no longer there. And this is the view of the new home. And then approaching from this angle, this is what this looks like, and now this is what the new home looks like. So that's 2 examples. So to look more, look at a higher level at trends in Concord over the past 5 years. There were 109 homes that were torn down and rebuilt as much larger homes. The sale price on average of those homes was around $675,000, and that was flipped over, and the average sale price of the new home that it flipped into was $1.7 million. And just to drill down a little bit on those teardowns, on those teardowns, the prices, there's 47 of those 109 were under 600,000, and there were 18 of them that were under 500,000. And just so you can picture what was being torn down, those houses that were torn down were built, this is just breaking down, 11 of those were built before 1900, 6 were born in the first 2 decades of the 20th century, then there's 3 between 1929 and 1939. The bulk of the homes, 59, were built in the 1950s, and then 30 homes were between 1960 and 1987. So I think that there's a lot of homes that were torn down in the past 5 years, considering we are as a town, recognize the need for smaller homes that are less expensive. We seem to be in the business of actually tearing them down and building something else. So the question is that we have to ask is, since we know there's a constituency out there for people wanting these smaller, less expensive homes, like less expensive in quotes, why do these properties keep turning over and getting sold to developers? And I've listed some ideas here, and these are my ideas. They're not scientifically proven. But I think these are important. This is an important question for us to ask ourselves if we're concerned about this. So One thing that I've noticed sort of anecdotally is that developers have well-developed networks and they're skilled at navigating to people who are thinking of selling and making a deal with them before it even goes to market. Second, the developers offer a higher price, or I would hypothesize that they're offering the highest price and they win out over non-developers bidding on a property. I would also think that it's possible that non-developers are intimidated by, so they come upon a house that needs renovations, they're intimidated by that process, or they might have to move somewhere else in the interim, or if they have a family, it's a big deal. They might not have money to support two households while one is being renovated. They don't want to deal with the hassle and the inconvenience of renovation. And finally, I think it's possible that the people that we're hearing from that want these homes in this price range and smaller homes, they don't want an outdated circa 1953 ranch home for that price. They want something else for that price. So there's a mismatch. I'm not sure. And I also just wanted to mention that we know, again, anecdotally, that some folks won't sell their home to a developer. So there's something happening out there where they're choosing to sell their home to a family because they value that. They value knowing that their home is going to be there and another family is going to live in it. So when I say what else, but I probably should keep going and take questions at the end and thoughts. So just concluding on this portion of the presentation about tear downs and that this is obviously still happening. And just thinking about, as a planning board, that we are so aware of needing more housing, and we hear about that a lot, especially more diverse housing. And we're thinking of different ways that we can do that and incentivize that as a planning board and make way for that. But I think we need to just also think about if we're going to, just realizing that this is happening. So if these homes are turning over into these larger homes with the attendant impacts, and then we're also advocating for infill of other areas to develop more housing, the net result is going to be a pretty substantive environmental impact in terms of what the landscape looks like. So I think that's just kind of important to think about, to keep that in mind as we're prioritizing where we're putting our energies. Okay, so I think that we have all heard of this issue, and I think folks are pretty concerned about it. We are not looking at it for the first time. In fact, the town has been doing a lot to address this issue and to study it and address it since 2002, which is when the Mansionization Committee was formed. They generated what we know as the Tainter Memo a year later. So the town invested, funds in having a consultant look at this. I'm not sure if you guys had a chance to look at that memo, but it's a really good summary of the work done at that time. I'm going to kind of skip around this list, but in 2010, another task force was developed to look at this. So in the past 20 years, it's been two substantive committees and task force developed specifically to work on this issue. And then in between those two efforts, there's ongoing long-range planning. And with the housing production plan, every time the town goes through those, they're also, again, looking at it and thinking about what we can do to address it. So what has been the outcome of this? One is that in 2010, the residents see, so I should say, so in 2000, I think the Tainter Memo came out in 2003. And I think in 2010 was the first time that this task force got together to really try to do something about this. That did result in building height and side yard setback adjustments in the zoning code. So that was the first time that there were bylaw adjustments to address it. And then in 2016, the FAR bylaw was successfully passed, which we're going to focus on in a bit. So I think the bottom line here is that we, as a planning board, we clearly have a mandate to, kind of pick up the ball and keep trying to push it up the hill with this. So what are these tools that have been generated by the ideas that have been generated by these different studies? One is the floor area ratio, building coverage ratio, increase building setback, reduce maximum heights, site plan review, neighborhood preservation district. So you'll see those things repeated in these documents throughout the past 2 decades. So the things that have come up more recently are to lower the limits on non-conforming lots subject to special permits. Think about incentivizing homeowners to sell to families instead of developers, and then allowance for net zero homes, which gets the green zoning we've been talking about. So to focus on floor area ratio for a moment. So the current floor area ratio bylaw was passed in 2016, and it's the first time that the town attempted to limit building size in this manner. And so it's been about 5 years. So this is what the current bylaw looks like. It sets a maximum floor area ratio, which is the living area divided by the lot area in all zones for residential, for all residential zones. And there is a provision for relief from that through a special permit. And also I would just note bullet 2 here, the floor area that they use, it excludes screen porches, decks, and accessory structures. So especially with a lot of these new homes, you have a lot of those, a lot of porches, a lot of decks, but we don't include that. It's really just the main structure of the house. So it does include the garage. So the question becomes, is the FAR set at the right place? So how is it set in the first place? And I don't think that it is an easy task to figure out where to set this. But I think I think Matt Johnson did a great job of figuring out a way to do it. So basically he just looked at the homes that were being built and the ones at the very top that people really felt just sort of were over the line, that he just made the line there. So that's how that formula was generated. And when I looked back in the 5 years preceding that, I found that there were 28 homes that would have exceeded the bylaw, like in the 5 years leading up to it. So I thought that was one way to think about the impact of the bylaw. So the question becomes, how do we know if the FAR is working? Well, we know that homes are not being built that exceed the FAR. So which homes are not being built? We can't say, or we don't really know. We don't have data on builders looking at the FAR and making that calculation and deciding and trying to comply with it and having a thought that they would have gone bigger, but they can't. We don't know that. So that's why I was looking at, if we look at the 5 years leading up to it, there were 28 homes that exceeded the FAR. So we can kind of think of that as like the avoided building area, since the bylaw was amended. So there definitely is a positive impact at that upper threshold of people kind of pushing the envelope, literally the building envelope. Other than that, I don't have a really good way to assess the impact, other than knowing that we still have a problem with tear downs. We still have a lot of houses turning over from a $600,000 house to a $1.5 million house. So can we keep working on this issue? Can we keep, is it time to lower the threshold? So here's a hypothetical of just looking at, if we do start to change that formula, what do we get? So in this table, you see the existing, that first column is the existing formula. And for a 10,000, oh, I'm sorry, the left-hand column is not labeled. This 10,000, 20,000, 40,000 is the lot area. So in a 10,000 square foot lot, you can build a 3,600 square foot home. That's the living area plus the garage. under the existing formula. If we ratchet it down and make that adding factor for reduce it from 0.24 to 0.20, you get down to 3,200, and then you can keep going down 3,000, 2,600. So the question is, okay, where do we set that line? I'm not sure we need to answer that question tonight. And the other piece of this is thinking about, is this a place to incentivize green building, net zero homes, to figure out what that means. But just as an example, we could keep the FAR threshold. We could lower the FAR max, but allow net zero homes to stay where the old max is. So that's just one idea of how that would work. So this is what I'd recommend going forward. I think this is a big issue. There's been a lot of ideas brought forth in terms of how to address it. And it's very complex, and we have to decide, are we trying to make homes marginal, like smaller on the margin? Are we trying to prevent homes from being torn down and rebuilt? Are we trying to have fewer trees be taken down? So I think one thing that we can do is take this case study, so we can look at five black duck, and go through the different tools and say, okay, this would be the result if we sort of apply the tool to this lot, and kind of see what the result is and see if that's something that is worth doing, especially relative to sort of the cost of implementing something or the difficulty of implementing something. So that's what I'd recommend for next steps. I think that with all the work that has gone into studying this issue, I think a lot of the tools are on the table. So I think it's definitely a manageable task to look at advocating for one particular tool or a suite of tools going forward to keep working on this issue. And I think we should definitely think of it as incremental process. So that's what I recommend that we do. And so yeah, that's as far as I've got. So what do you guys think?
I think that was very comprehensive. Thank you so much for combing through all that. A little bit depressing, but I appreciate all the information. Let's hear from the other planning board members before we open it up to public comment. And let's think about those next steps that Kate recommended, or ask any questions ahead of time.
That was awesome, Kate.
Yeah, it was very well put together. I appreciate the real world examples there too.
I think if we just let her keep working on it, she'll probably solve it on her own.
Yeah, Kate, this was great. I have a couple of questions. So one of the issues, I think, that the reason FAR, so there's a difference between building envelope and FAR, right? And the building envelope is what's causing, I'm not sure if the FAR is the main problem, or the square footage is the main problem, is the only problem in creating massive houses. So there's something about the building envelope also. So that is a factor. So that's something that I wanted to. So the volume, that's what we talked about. So how the house is constructed. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think we mentioned this before, to have something like, maybe we need different typologies of houses, like was it 5 black duck? So we need something like that, but maybe something, another one that's much larger, on a much larger site, and something that's, so different types of sites that what the FAR does, because on each different site, it's going to have a completely different impact dealing with the FAR. So those are my two comments on this. But otherwise, I think it's a great presentation.
Yeah. So Alan, with your regard to your second point, like, do you think we should do sort of a case study of like a smaller lot and a larger lot? Like, do we know what it is that we want on different types of lots, or? So
that's a good question. I mean, there might be. So there's something about you mentioned the character of the place, the footprint, right? There's a footprint. Yeah, so there are many factors. So maybe we should minimize those factors also, limit the factors that we are looking at. Because, but part of, FARs work very well at dealing with FAR in a very urban settings, because that's something to control density, traffic, and but when it comes to towns like Concord, FAR is one tool, but I mean, it's a good tool to have, but it's not, I can see why it's not that effective, because I mean, sites are very big, and so you don't get to that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud, so I'm not saying anything useful, I think.
No, it's very useful. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think with these, I think the next step in looking at these and seeing what would really make a difference. I mean, and I sort of know what, I'm feeling what it's going to make a bigger difference, but I think that's probably helpful. So I'll make a table and I'll sort of say, like, what would the outcome be with this tool? And then what is the process look like for implementing this tool? Like, a neighborhood preservation district is completely different than something like increasing setback in the zoning bylaw in terms of the process. In this, you know, I think eventually we'll have to maybe have a discussion, and I wish that we could all be physically present with each other about what the goal is. You know, is it to make the homes look a certain way? Is it to make them smaller? Is it to make them energy efficient? Is it to keep them in a you know, minimize the number of homes that are turning over into a much higher price bracket? Is it all of those things? But I'm not sure if tonight's the night for that discussion.
Yep, I think we should kind of comb through the long range plan and see if we can kind of pick out, which I know many of those themes that you mentioned are in there. So we might want to, you know, pick out which are the most important there. So that it's not just the vision of this board, but, you know, the long range plan. So, I mean, I know we're not giving you a lot of feedback, and you've done a lot of work so far, and thank you for agreeing to kind of take that next step. You know, please let us or Elizabeth know what other information would be helpful to you. I'd like to hear from the public as well. So since we've got a few people on the line, and I'm sure there will be a lot more, you know, public input on this. And so I think when we have, you know, perhaps some more concrete steps, maybe we can have a public meeting. Public hearing. I can't remember what the term, sorry. Because I think it is a term, or it's something that a lot of people who have attended our meetings all these years do comment on. And so we want to make sure we, you know, we're also incorporating their thinking. So I see Stefan Bader has a hand up.
Thank you. Stefan Bader, 7 River Street. Thank you, Kate. That's a tremendous summary. I 2 points that I come away with on the energy efficiency or energy usage. I suspect that an argument could be made that replacing an oil burning 1950s Cape with a highly insulated, you know, current building codes might be twice the size of house, but it might actually use less energy. There is that possibility, I think. I'm not an expert, but I just throw that out there. The other point that I thought about in terms of the diversity of housing and the diversity of the population in the town is the question of, so for the people who can afford $600,000 or $700,000 houses, but don't want to take on renovation projects, they obviously can't afford a 1.7 million house. Where do they go? They're not staying in Concord. And probably likewise with the people who can afford $1 million house. If 1.7 is what's on offer, they're going somewhere else. And I think that it may not be the immediate or primary purview of the planning board, but it is certainly a big part of the discussion about how the planning board can deal with those issues. And I applaud you all for tackling it, continuing to tackle it. It's not going to go away soon, but those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands up, but let me give it another minute in case there are. And in the meantime, did any other planning board members have any comments for Kate, perhaps to further investigate? I mean, obviously you're on the right track and you've got lots of, I mean, I think like once we narrow down the goals or prioritize the goals, I think that will help that, you know, that analysis of that next step. So thank you for offering to do that. All right. Well, that was.
Kristen?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's 2 hand raised.
Oh, great. Oh, Sue Felshen.
Yeah, sorry, me again. Sue Felshen, 19 Sunnyside Lane. That was great, Kate, but I find myself wondering what the planning board's goal is specifically, and you brought this up yourself. Is it to eliminate or to reduce the impact of super huge houses, or is it to provide more diversity of housing stock in the town? Because with your wonderful articles you're putting forth for 2-family houses, would we be satisfied with a large house if only it were a 2-family? And I understand that building a 2-family is more expensive than an equally large 1-family because it has to have 2 kitchens and so forth. But nevertheless, it's a way to provide more affordable housing to people in the town. So if you consider requiring greater setbacks or reducing building heights or some other thing, my primary comment here is to say, please don't do that in a way that makes it harder to build 2 families.
Thank you. And Stefan, Mr. Bader, did you have another comment? We can unmute you. Or did we just forget to put your hand down?
Forgot to put the hand down.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. All right, now I really don't see any other hands up. All right, so that leaves us to the draft minutes review. There are 2 sets, both from February the 9th and the 23rd. Let's start with the February 9th. Did anyone have any changes or amendments to the minutes of February 9th? And then if not, we'll continue to the 23rd and then we'll take a motion for both. Okay, not seeing any for the 9th. How about the 23rd? Did anybody run across anything that we need to update for February 23rd minutes? All right, hearing no suggestions for amendments, I would, oh, go ahead.
Linda, did you have a change on?
I did have one typo. Sorry, I'm I think it was on the February 9th. And it was on the second page, the second line. I think it said business owners and ways the town can support local businesses. Oh, I guess that would work.
I see what you're saying.
It should be like about ways, or has been talking with business owners.
Yeah, how about ways the town can support local businesses? Thank you. Any other changes? Okay, then I would entertain a motion for both sets of minutes.
Make a motion to that we approve the minutes of February 9th, 2021 and February 23rd, 2021. And Linda, pardon me, the edit you had was to the 23rd, right?
The 9th.
The 9th, excuse me. So and with the 9th as amended with Linda's comments.
Second.
I'll second that.
All right, Mr. Saya. He's coming. I really think I heard him. Mr. Flint?
Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Bosdet?
Yes.
Ms. Orvidal?
Yes.
Ms. McEnany?
Yes.
And Ms. Miller?
Yes.
And is Ms. Ferguson? Yes. So minutes taken care of, which leaves any liaison reports or town planner updates. I went to the town meeting preview, and I'm just going to say you guys all missed out. So next year, you should jump on it. One thing that I did hear, which was interesting, and obviously, everybody's going to hear this. It was a preview of all the articles that different committees are putting forward. But did you know that the town is considering building a cell tower on Kai's Road and leasing it to phone companies? Did we know that? I mean, I think it must be within our overlay district, so it doesn't really matter to us. I just thought that was interesting, considering how much discussion happens around cell towers and overlay districts. The other thing is, as I mentioned before, because they'd mentioned it for a while, is that they're looking at, they're proposing a change to the demolition delay bylaw. And it says, and so Kate, they kind of researched similar information, and they found since 2016, 188 new houses were constructed, 110 were tear downs, which was about 50.
Wait. What? Who did that?
This is the demolition delay, or who was that? Historic Preservation Committee? Who's in charge of the demolition delay bylaw?
Yeah, so this is the demolition review bylaw for under the Historical Commission.
Historical Commission.
So this is structures built before 1940 require person to submit an application for demolition review to the Historical Commission.
So they were looking at it from that perspective, and I think they said like 41 properties trigger the delay, and only 2 of those properties were saved. So they're going to try to do something, and
sounds like maybe we should get together.
Yeah, I mean, so they're proposing something this time to do with when the delay starts and so forth and so on. And in other news, somebody reported, I imagine, I think it was Alice Kaufman was reporting about green zoning type things, but there are more than 100 electric homes in Concord already, in case we were curious about that. I was curious. So that's kind of what I got from the town meeting preview. Elizabeth has some information, but are there any other liaison reports? Okay, Elizabeth, you have at least a meeting change, and then kind of letting everybody know about upcoming meetings.
Yeah, so when the planning board needs to schedule your April 26th reschedule your April 27th meeting, because that's the night the select board has their town meeting public hearing. So the thought was to look at moving it to May 4th, which means you would have a meeting Tuesday, May 4th, and then the following week, that Thursday is your public hearing for town meeting. So try as I might to have them have finance committee on Thursday and planning board on Tuesday, which is how it's been forever. Your public hearing is now on a Thursday. So please make sure you mark your calendar. It's May 13th. But my question is whether the planning board wants to, if everybody's available for May 3rd instead of May 4th instead of April 27th. So I can send out a doodle poll if that's easier.
Okay, why don't you do that, and then I'll give everybody a chance to look at their calendars.
Okay.
So thank you for working on that scheduling. All right, go ahead.
The only thing I'd like to just let the planning board know is that in the near future, you'll be getting an application for site plan review for the daycare at 250 Old Bedford Road. That's at the corner of Old Bedford and Virginia Road. The Concord Children's Center has purchased that property.
Yep.
And we'll be looking to do an expansion to relocate the Children's Center. I think it's relocating out of the Ripley School Administration building to that new facility. So that's
okay.
coming.
That's coming, and so is the subdivision on Cambridge Turnpike, right? Coming back to us.
Subdivision on Cambridge Turnpike.
Am I saying no? Fitchburg Turnpike.
Yes.
Potentially.
Potentially.
Okay.
Haven't heard anything on that one.
Okay.
And then the other project that's kind of still in the works is everybody knows that Deborah Stark from Deborah's Natural Gourmet purchased the 5 and 10, and so Linda's shaking her head no. So yes, Deborah Stark.
Everybody knows.
So when
everybody knows.
So Deborah Stark purchased from Maynard Forbes the 5 and 10 building, and we'll be looking to expand some aspect of the the grocery store into that building. So I'm not sure if that's going to be just site plan review or if they need some special permit element, but the planning board will be seeing that at some time.
Okay. All right, so next meeting, March 23rd, finalize the warrant articles before that closes. Public hearing on May 13th, and then some meetings in April, 2BD with whatever good stuff comes along. So let me just open it up for any final public comment, should there be any from our last hanger-oners. But you better raise your hand quickly before I adjourn at an even 9:45. I don't see any other hands. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the 23rd, 9:46. We will adjourn. Bye, all.
Bye. Bye.